Good evening and welcome to the Sleep to Law series. Tonight, we will talk about Night Shift, the first collection of short stories published by Stephen King in 1978, which captures the raw and relentless energy of his early career. If you would like to see more content like this, please subscribe or leave a comment down below, as it really helps the channel grow. As a new channel, every member who joins is helping to build this library of lore from the ground up, so if you want to support these deep dives, click the join button below. Before we begin, I have a question for you. Do you feel more comfortable during the day, or do you prefer the quiet isolation of the night? Let me know in the comments below, because the stories we are discussing today thrive on that exact feeling of isolation. Now let us step into the darkness. Introduction. The house is quiet. Outside, a cold February rain lashes against the glass, and the wind threatens to sever the power lines, plunging the world into darkness. In this setting, we must speak honestly about fear. But before we step into the dark, we have to understand the architect of these nightmares. John D. MacDonald, a veteran of the craft, introduces us to the reality of the writer's existence, stripping away the romantic veneer. He describes the amateur who approaches a writer at a party with a conspiratorial grin, claiming they too have always wanted to write. The polite response is silence, but the honest one is a mirror. I've always wanted to be a brain surgeon. The absurdity highlights a fundamental psychological truth about the creative process. Desire is meaningless without the grueling mechanics of execution. You do not learn to cut into the human brain by wishing. You do not learn to craft a story by dreaming. Proficiency is born solely from the act itself. Stephen King, MacDonald notes, possesses a compulsive diligence, a gluttonous appetite for words that borders on obsession. This is not merely a job, it is a metabolic necessity. The writer must consume libraries of text, digesting them with a mix of envy and contempt, learning to distinguish between the pretension of ornate language and the visceral impact of true storytelling. It is an exercise in empathy, finding pieces of oneself in every character, even the monsters. This empathy leads to the creation of story, the absolute monarch of fiction. A story is simply something happening to someone you have been forced to care about. When the author intrudes, waving their hand to show off a clever phrase, the spell shatters. King's power lies in his invisibility. He does not write to please an audience, but to satisfy an internal demand. In doing so, he taps into a universal current of anxiety. Now, we shift to the mind of King himself. He presents himself as a rational man, a father, a husband, a resident of a pleasant lakeside home. Yet, rationality is often just a thin layer of ice over a deep, dark lake. He admits to a primal behavior, checking that his legs are covered at night. It is a logic-defying ritual to ensure a cold hand does not reach out from beneath the bed to grasp his ankle. This is the core of the horror genre, the acknowledgement that while the monsters aren't real, the fear they inspire is palpable and historic. Why write this? King proposes that every human mind comes equipped with a filter. For most, the filter catches the mundane or the technical, but for the horror writer, the filter catches the sludge, the macabre, the grotesque, the off-putting debris of the subconscious. Writing is not a choice, but a method of sifting through this mental waste. It is a localized illness, an obsession that must be bled out onto the page to keep the host sane. And why do we read it? Why do we voluntarily subject ourselves to terror? The answer lies in the car accident syndrome. We are biologically wired to slow down and look at the wreckage. Whether it is Beowulf tearing an arm off a monster, or a modern film about demonic possession, we are compelled to witness the destruction. It is a rehearsal for our own mortality. We look at the twisted metal and the blood to understand the fragility of our own bodies. Horror fiction acts as a terminal, a switching station between the conscious, rational world and the subconscious, symbolic landscape of our nightmares. Mainstream literature rides the subway line of the external world, while surrealist poetry rides the internal line. Horror stands where the tracks cross. It is the place where the dream logic bleeds into reality, where the fabric of the universe begins to unravel with shocking suddenness. There is a profound psychological utility here. The horror writer is akin to the ancient Welsh sin-eater, absorbing the fears of the community. When we read a horror story, we are engaging in a barter system. We take one of the writer's imaginary phobias out of the basket and replace it temporarily with one of our real-world anxieties. We trade the fear of cancer, of failure, of loneliness for the fear of a vampire or a creature in the basement. It is a cathartic release. Ultimately, all these fears, the dark, the height, the sudden noise, coalesce into one singular shape. We are like the blind men touching different parts of an elephant, trying to describe the whole. In horror, the elephant is always the same thing. It is the shape of a body under a sheet. It is the recognition of our own inevitable end. The show is about to start. The writer is inviting us into the room to touch that shape under the sheet. It is time to suspend disbelief, to let the rational mind sleep, and to descend into the sludge. Jerusalem's Lot, October 2nd, 1850. The mid-19th century wind cuts across the coast of Maine, carrying with it the scent of salt, rotting kelp, and something far older. Our narrator, the aristocratic and recently widowed Charles Boone, has arrived at his ancestral home, Chapelwaite. He writes to his friend, a man he affectionately calls Bones, detailing his relocation to this grim manor perched on a jutting headland north of Portland. Charles is a man seeking solace. He has lost his wife, Sarah, to illness, and he himself has only just recovered from a brain fever, what we might today recognize as a severe nervous breakdown or a bout of psychotic depression. He is a man fragile of mind, seeking a geography of healing, but he has unknowingly stepped into a geography of damnation. Chapelwaite is not a welcoming sanctuary. It is a grand, dark relic, described by Charles as having a sinister quality, surrounded by 4 acres of grounds that have surrendered to the wild. The vegetation doesn't just grow, it claws and creeps, choking the stone walls. There are statues on the grounds, grotesque imitations of Greek forms that seem ready to lunge at passers-by. It is a classic Gothic setting, a physical manifestation of the rot that can infest a family tree. Charles is accompanied only by his manservant, Calvin McCann, a man described as practical, silent, and dependable. Calvin serves as the grounding rod for Charles, the voice of reason that will slowly be eroded by the impossible reality of the Boone legacy. In these early letters, we see Charles trying to maintain a facade of normalcy. He describes the house's 23 rooms, the mildewed wainscoting, and the portraits of ancestors he barely knows. He mentions his cousin Stephen, the previous owner, who fell to his death from the porch. There is a specific focus on the noises in the house. Charles hears scratching and scuttling behind the walls. He rationalizes this immediately. Rats. Huge rats. It is a desperate comfort to name the horror, to categorize it as a pest rather than a presence. This is a common psychological defense mechanism. The mind's attempt to fit the irrational into a rational box to preserve sanity. By October 6th, the atmosphere thickens. The local villagers in the nearby hamlet of Preacher's Corners react to Charles and Calvin with a mixture of hostility and superstitious dread. When Calvin attempts to hire woodcutters, he is met with fear. The locals believe the house is bad. They suggest that anyone living in Chapelwaite is either mad or courting madness. There is a heavy, unspoken history here, a weight of scandal and myth that Charles dismisses as rustic ignorance. He is an educated man, a man of logic, and he views their fear as the quaint trembling of the uneducated. But the reader knows better. In the world of Stephen King, the superstitions of the locals are rarely wrong. They are usually the first line of defense against an encroaching darkness. The house begins to reveal its secrets. Calvin, while exploring the library, hears the scratching sounds again. It isn't just the sound of movement. It is a thudding, a blundering noise accompanied by a hideous gurgling. It sounds like something struggling to get out. This leads to the discovery of a hidden compartment behind a row of false books. Inside they find no rats but a map. It is a hand-drawn map of a village called Jerusalem's Lot. The map features a church marked with a disturbing legend: "The worm that doth corrupt." This discovery triggers a curiosity in Charles that proves fatal. He asks his friend Bones to check with historians about this Jerusalem's Lot, a deserted village near the Royal River. But Charles cannot wait for a reply. On a gloomy, overcast day, he and Calvin set out to find the place themselves. The journey to Jerusalem's Lot is a descent into an underworld. The woods are silent. No birds, no insects, just the oppressive roar of the ocean and the smell of salt. They cross a rotting bridge and enter the village. It is perfectly preserved, a Mary Celeste of a town. The architecture is Puritan, austere and commanding, yet decayed. They enter a tavern, the Boar's Head, and find it untouched. Tables are set, a mirror is unbroken. It has not been vandalized by time or man. It has been shunned. The implication is terrifying. Something keeps the vandals away. Something keeps nature itself at bay. The silence here is heavy, described as leaden. It is a silence that isn't empty, but full of watching. They reach the church. It is the heart of the rot. The windows are black with shadows. When they enter, the smell of decay is overpowering. In the vestibule, they find a painting that mocks Christianity, a grotesque Madonna and child surrounded by sporting demons. Inside the sanctuary, the blasphemy continues. There is a cross, beautifully wrought in gold, but it hangs upside down, the symbol of the satanic mass. Charles, despite his skepticism, feels the touch of a profound, ancient evil. He climbs the pulpit and finds a massive book bound in leather, De Vermis Mysteries, or The Mysteries of the Worm. This acts as a connection to the wider Lovecraftian mythos, cementing the story in a universe where ancient cosmic entities slumber beneath the earth. As Charles touches the book, the church seems to vibrate. He hears chanting, a low, subterranean sound. The pulpit trembles. Panic seizes them and they flee the village, crossing back over the bridge as if escaping hell itself. Upon returning to Chapelwaite, the haunting intensifies. It is no longer just noises. Charles begins to understand that the rats are a euphemism for something far worse. He digs into the local history, confronting a woman named Mrs. Cloris. She finally breaks the silence. She tells him that the house has always been bad, built in unhappiness. She speaks of Charles's grandfather, Robert, and his brother, Philip Boone. There was a schism in the family in 1789, a feud over stolen papers and dark practices. She whispers that Philip was a man who trafficked with the unholy, and that on Halloween night in 1789, he and the entire population of Jerusalem's Lot simply vanished. Mrs. Cloris warns Charles to leave. She speaks of omens, a child born without eyes, whippoorwills gathering in the cemeteries, a traditional psychopomp, birds that guide souls to the afterlife. She tells him, blood calls to blood. This is the central theme of the narrative, the inescapability of lineage. Charles believes he is a separate entity, a modern man, but his blood carries a curse. He is the lock to a door his ancestors built, and he has returned to turn the key. The horror culminates in the cellar of Chapelwaite. Charles and Calvin descend to investigate the source of the sounds. The walls of the cellar are not just stone. They are barriers holding back a nightmare. At the far end, behind a partition, they find a scene of atrocity frozen in time. They see apparitions, not transparent ghosts, but solid, rotting figures. A face with eyes as black as the river Styx leers at them. It is one of the Boones, dead for decades, yet animated by a dark purpose. They see a young girl, Marcella, who died in the house, her neck broken. The dead things lunge for them. Charles creates a diversion with fire, and they escape, but the psychological damage is done. Charles now knows the things in the walls are his kin. They are the Nosferatu, the undead, waiting in the twilight shadows to serve their master. Recovering from this shock, Calvin discovers a diary belonging to Charles's grandfather, Robert Boone. The diary decodes the mystery. It tells of a man named James Boone, a religious fanatic who founded Jerusalem's lot in 1710. This James Boone was an ancestor, the origin of the corruption. He led a cult of incest and dark rites, seeking immortality through the worship of the worm. The diary reveals that Philip Boone, Charles's great-uncle, fell under James Boone's spell, obtained the forbidden book De Vermi Mysterieux, and attempted to bring about a cataclysmic ritual. The diary ends abruptly in 1789 with the disappearance of the village. Charles realizes he is the last of the Boone line. The date is approaching October 31st, All Hallows' Eve. The cycle is closing. He feels a compulsion, a siren call from the deserted village. He knows he must return to destroy the book and end the curse. He tries to slip away alone to spare Calvin, but his faithful servant catches him. In a moment of tragic loyalty, Calvin refuses to let his master face the darkness alone. On November 4th, Charles writes his final entry. He recounts the events of that Halloween night. He and Calvin returned to the church in Jerusalem's lot. The scene was set for a ritual. A butchered lamb lay on the pulpit. The book, De Vermis Mysterious, glowed with a scarlet light. As they approached, the church began to shake. The reality of the world began to thin. They heard the chanting of the invisible congregation, the voices of the damned calling out in an ancient pre-human tongue, Gyagin Varda Yogsogoth Verminis. Charles, possessed by the spirit of his ancestors, begins to chant with them. He is the vessel. He speaks the words that open the gate. The floor of the church rips open. This is the moment the title, Jerusalem's Lot, fully explains itself. It is not a place of God, but a lot cast for the devil. From the bowels of the earth, the entity rises. It is not a ghost or a vampire in the traditional sense. It is a worm, a massive white, gelatinous horror. Charles realizes with a sanity-shattering clarity that the thing rising from the pit is merely one segment of a creature that extends miles beneath the earth. It is a cosmic parasite, a star-eater. In a final act of desperation, Charles throws a burning match onto the book. The De Vermis Mysterious catches fire. The connection is severed. The worm, screaming soundlessly, crashes back into the earth. But the physical toll is immense. Calvin is thrown against the wall, his neck broken, dead instantly. Charles is left alone in the ruins of the church. But he is not truly alone. From the hole in the floor, a figure crawls out. It is the undead corpse of James Boone, the keeper of the worm. He is a skeleton in a rotting cassock, his eyes burning with red, insane life. He comes to claim his kin. Charles flees screaming, running until his lungs burn, leaving his friend's body behind. He ends his letter from Chapelwaite, a broken man. He believes he is the gateway. He believes the curse lives in his blood. To close the door forever, he intends to walk into the sea, ending the Boone line and the threat of the worm. It is a noble, tragic suicide, a sacrifice to save humanity from the sleeper beneath the ground. But the story does not end with Charles's death. We jump forward in time to 1971. We are presented with a note signed by James Robert Boone. He is a distant descendant, proof that Charles was wrong. He was not the last of the line. Bastard children of the grandfather survived, carrying the bloodline forward to the 20th century. James Robert Boone has inherited Chapelwaite. He dismisses Charles's letters as the ravings of a madman, a forgery created to justify the murder of Calvin McCann. He views the myth of Jerusalem's Lot as mere folklore. He is a man of the modern age, a skeptic, blind to the history that throbs in the floorboards. He writes that he has moved into the ancestral home. He hopes to clear the family name. But the final sentences of the story drop the stomach out of the reader. He notes, casually, that the house needs an exterminator. There are some huge rats in the walls, he writes. By the sound. The cycle has not ended. It has merely reset. The blood has returned to chapel weight. The worm still sleeps beneath the earth, and the keeper is waiting. The tragedy of Jerusalem's lot is not just the horror of the monsters, but the horror of ignorance. The past is never truly dead. It is just waiting for the right tenant to move in. Graveyard shift. The heat in Gates Falls, Maine, is a physical weight, pressing down on the graveyard shift at the textile mill. It is 2 a.m. on a Friday, the deadest hour of the night. Yet the air remains thick, hovering near 90 degrees. Hall, a drifter who has spent his life moving from one menial job to another, sits on a bench on the 3rd floor. He is a man who appreciates the solitude of the late hours, the time when the mill's industrial heartbeat slows to a murmur. But tonight, that solitude is broken by Warwick, the foreman. Warwick is a man of petty cruelty, a beefy tyrant who despises the men under him, particularly Hall, whom he derisively calls college boy. This nickname is a weapon, a reminder of Hall's fall from academic grace to the dusty, deafening reality of the picker machine. The tension between them is immediate, a microcosm of the class war fought in the sweaty bowels of industry. But Warwick hasn't come to trade insults. He has a job offer. The mill is shutting down for the 4th of July week, not for celebration, but for a purge. The basement, a place neglected for 12 years, needs cleaning. It is a hazardous, filthy task, but the pay is double time. Hall, calculating the $75 he could clear, accepts. He needs the money more than he needs his dignity. As the crew descends into the basement the following Monday, the true nature of the mill reveals itself. It is not just a factory. It is a living, rotting organism. The basement is a cathedral of decay, lit by a string of 60 bulbs that barely penetrate the gloom. The floor is slick with slime and river ooze, the air thick with the stench of rotting fabric and ancient masonry. But the real horror lies in the shadows. The rats. They are everywhere, huge and fearless, thriving in this damp underworld. They are not merely pests. They are the true owners of the mill, an atavistic force waiting to reclaim the space from the humans. As the days pass, the cleaning crew, armed with high-pressure hoses, blasts away layers of industrial filth, uncovering a history of neglect. The psychological toll on the men is palpable. Wisconski, a heavy-set and fearful worker, becomes the voice of their collective dread. He senses that the rats are different here, smarter, larger, more organized. Hall, however, feels a strange pull toward the darkness. He watches Warwick, his hatred for the foreman coalescing with the grim atmosphere. There is a sense that the rats and the humans are on a collision course, orchestrated by the rotting architecture itself. By Thursday, the crew has pushed deep into the basement's recesses. The rats have vanished, a silence more terrifying than their squeaking. It is here that Hall finds it, a trapdoor, hidden beneath the grime, sealed with a ring bolt. It leads to a sub-basement, a place even the mill's blueprints have forgotten. This discovery triggers a shift in the power dynamic. Hall, utilizing his knowledge of town zoning laws, threatens Warwick. He blackmails the foreman into exploring the pit, weaponizing the very regulations Warwick ignores. It is a moment of cold calculation. Hall is no longer just a worker. He is the executioner. Hall, Warwick, and a terrified Wisconski descend into the sub-basement. The air here is ancient, heavy with the smell of things that should remain buried. As they move away from the trapdoor, their flashlights cutting through the Stygian dark, the reality of the mill's ecosystem is revealed. The rats have not left, they have evolved. Cut off from the surface, nature has twisted them into nightmares. They are gigantic, some as large as dogs, but they are blind and legless, dragging themselves forward with a hideous, pulsating hunger. They are mutations born of industrial waste and darkness, a grotesque mirror of the mill's corruption. The climax is a descent into madness. The rats surround them, a sea of wet fur and clicking teeth. Warwick, the bully, crumbles. His authority means nothing to the blind, hungry horde. He turns to run, but Hall is waiting. In a final act of vengeance, Hall turns the high-pressure hose not on the rats, but on Warwick. He blasts the foreman back into the darkness toward the writhing mass. Warwick's screams are swallowed by the squealing of the swarm. Hall stands at the edge of the abyss and sees the source of the horror, the Magna Mater, the queen rat. It is a monstrosity the size of a calf, a pulsating, eyeless bloat that rules this subterranean kingdom. Hall has fed the foreman to the beast, a sacrifice to the dark gods of the mill, but the victory is Pyrrhic. As Hall tries to retreat, the hose pressure failing, the ecosystem claims him too. Mutated bats, the size of crows, descend from the ceiling. The rats surge forward. The hunter becomes the prey, and the mill's digestion continues, indifferent to whether the meat is a foreman or a college boy. Night surf. The scene shifts from the claustrophobia of the underground to the vast, indifferent emptiness of the coastline. It is August at Anson Beach, but the summer holds no warmth. The world has been hollowed out by a superflu known as A6, or Captain Trips. The noise of civilization has been replaced by the rhythmic, eternal pounding of the night surf. Bernie, the narrator, walks the dunes with a small group of survivors. They are the flotsam of a wrecked humanity: Susie, Needles, Corey, Kelly, and Joan. They are young, aimless, and rotting from the inside out. There is no grand quest for a cure, no heroic last stand. There is only the waiting. They occupy a beach that was once crowded with tourists and sunburned families, now reclaimed by the ocean and the silence. Earlier that night they committed an atrocity. They found a sick man named Alvin Sackheim in a Lincoln Continental and burned him alive on a pyre of driftwood. Bernie recounts this not with horror, but with a detached, numbed cynicism. They told themselves it was a sacrifice to keep the virus away, a reversion to pagan superstition in the face of extinction. But deep down, Bernie knows the truth. They did it because they could. They did it because cruelty is the only way to feel alive in a dying world. It highlights the rapid decay of human morality when the structures of society collapse. The dynamic between the survivors is toxic. Bernie's relationship with Susie is defined by contempt and desperation. She seeks reassurance. He offers only cold insults. They cling to each other, not out of love, but out of a terrifying fear of being alone in the void. Corey carries a radio that plays the only two stations left: a religious zealot and a group of teenagers playing prank calls. These voices are the last gasps of a species talking to itself in the dark. The turning point comes when Needles, the most cynical of them all, reveals the truth. He lights a match under his jaw, showing Bernie the swollen glands. He has the virus. The myth of their immunity is shattered. They had convinced themselves that having the A2 flu previously protected them from A6, a lie they told themselves to stave off the madness. Now, the clock has started ticking. The virus is not a dramatic villain. It is a mundane inevitability. It is just the flu. Bernie wanders away from the group, staring out at the ocean. He reflects on the past, on a girl named Maureen he knew before the end, and the triviality of their old lives. The juxtaposition is jarring. The memory of pizza and pop music against the reality of burning bodies and swelling necks. He realizes that there will be no legacy. He imagines a bronze plaque on the salt flats that simply reads, "Just the flu." It is the ultimate cosmic joke. Humanity ends not with a bang, but with a sneeze. The story closes with a sense of quiet resignation. Bernie drinks a warm beer, watching the sun threaten to rise. He knows winter is coming, a winter they will not survive. But the ocean doesn't care. The surf continues to beat against the shore, a relentless, rhythmic reminder that the planet will go on without them. The horror of night surf isn't the death of the human race. It's the realization that the universe doesn't mourn us. We are temporary, and the tide will wash away our footprints just as easily as it washes away the sandcastles. I am the doorway. The humidity of the Florida coast hangs heavy, a stark contrast to the absolute freezing void of deep space. We begin with Arthur, a man shattered by gravity and circumstance, sitting on his porch in a wheelchair. He is a cripple, a former astronaut whose life ended, metaphorically speaking, when his capsule slammed back to Earth, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. But the paralysis is the least of his worries. The true horror lies wrapped in thick bandages around his hands, hidden from the prying eyes of his friend Richard. Richard is the only one who visits. He's a remnant of the normal world, smoking cigars and talking about the mundane. But Arthur can't exist in the mundane anymore. He is living in a biological nightmare, a psychological siege where his own body has become the beachhead for an invasion. He tells Richard a story that sounds like madness, that he has killed a local boy. Not with a gun or a knife, but with his mind, or rather with the minds that have hijacked his flesh. To understand the horror, we must look back at the mission. Arthur and his co-pilot, Corey, had journeyed to Venus. King paints space travel not as a glorious trek, but as a descent into a haunted house. Venus wasn't just a planet. It was a skull, picked clean, a desolate, shrouded thing that felt inherently wrong. While orbiting beneath that suffocating cloud cover, Arthur felt a primal fear, a sense that they were trespassing in a graveyard of the cosmos. Corey had gone outside the ship for repairs, and Arthur suspects that this was the moment of infection. Not a virus, but a presence, a hitchhiker from the void. When they crashed back to Earth, Corey died. Arthur survived, but he didn't come back alone. The manifestation began as an itch, a maddening, deep dermal crawling sensation in his hands. It wasn't a rash. It was a gestation. When Arthur finally looked, really looked, he saw the impossible. Tiny red circles on his fingertips. And then, the opening. The flesh split, not in wounds, but in lids. Eyes, tiny golden alien eyes, peering out from the tissue of his own fingers. This is the ultimate violation of the self. We often fear external monsters, but the true terror of "I am the doorway" is internal mutiny. Arthur is no longer the pilot of his own vessel, he is merely the doorway. These eyes allow the alien intelligence to see our world, and they hate it. When Arthur looks through them, a sensation he describes as seeing through 1,000 multifaceted insect lenses, he sees our reality as grotesque, distorted, and horrifying. The tragedy peaks with the boy, a young, innocent kid who walked the beach sieving for coins. Arthur didn't want to hurt him, but the entity did. The alien presence, disgusted and terrified by the boy's appearance in their vision, lashed out. They used Arthur as a conduit. A psychic blast, a telekinetic hammer blow, shattered the boy's mind and killed him instantly. Arthur was merely the gun. The things in his hands pulled the trigger. Back on the porch, Richard demands to see the proof. He doesn't believe. He thinks Arthur is suffering from survivor's guilt or a mental break, driven by a desperate need to be understood, to prove that he isn't a murderer by choice. Arthur begins to unwind the bandages. The atmosphere shifts from psychological tension to elemental fury. A storm is brewing over the gulf, mirroring the turbulence in Arthur's soul. As the last bandage falls, Richard screams. He sees them. He sees the dozen golden eyes embedded in his friend's flesh, blinking, watching, alien, and undeniably real. The reaction is catastrophic. The alien presence perceives Richard's terror as a threat. Arthur screams for his friend to run, but it's too late. The doorway is open. the entity reaches out, connecting with the charged atmosphere of the storm. A bolt of lightning, guided by the alien will, strikes Richard down, incinerating him on the spot. Arthur is left alone with the corpses of his friend and the boy, and the terrible knowledge of what he is. He realizes he cannot let this continue. The door must be shut. In a scene of excruciating resolve, he subjects himself to the only cure he can think of. He soaks his hands in kerosene and lights a match. It is a brutal act of self-preservation through self-destruction. He burns the eyes out, enduring agony to sear the gateway shut. 7 years pass. We find Arthur living a quiet, maimed existence. He has hooks for hands now. He thinks he has won. He thinks he has exorcised the demons of Venus. But the story ends with a final, chilling revelation that underscores the futility of fighting the unknown. The itch has returned. The door wasn't destroyed. It was merely moved. Arthur looks down at his chest. There, arranged in a perfect circle over his heart, are 12 golden eyes. The invasion is complete. He is no longer a man. He is a vessel, and his only remaining option is the shotgun in the corner. The mangler. We shift now from the cold hostility of space to the hot, steam-choked interior of the Blue Ribbon Laundry. Here the horror is industrial, mechanical, and greasy. The antagonist is the Hadley-Watson Model 6 speed ironer and folder. The workers call it the mangler. Police officer John Hunton is called to the scene of a gruesome accident. A worker, Mrs. Frawley, has been pulled into the machine. The description is visceral. The machine is designed to press and fold sheets at high heat and pressure. It does not distinguish between linen and bone. Mrs. Frawley was flattened, cooked, and folded. Hunton is a rational man, a creature of law and order, but the mangler defies logic. The investigation reveals that the safety bar, a mechanism designed to snap the machine off if a hand gets too close, is in perfect working order. For the accident to have happened as it did, Mrs. Frawley would have had to fall in from above, which is physically impossible. Enter Mark Jackson, an English professor and Hunton's friend. Jackson serves as the bridge between the forensic and the arcane. He suggests what Hunton is afraid to admit. The machine isn't malfunctioning. It's possessed. King masterfully intertwines the mundane neglect of industrial safety with ancient occultism. We learn that the laundry is a place of misery, heat, and tension, but the true horror is the recipe. Jackson identifies a series of coincidental ingredients that have inadvertently turned the machine into a conduit for a demon. First, there was blood. A young worker named Sherry cut her finger on the clamps, the blood of a virgin. Then, the machine needed a connection to the grave. It turns out that Mrs. Frawley, who suffered from indigestion, had dropped a bottle of antacid tablets into the gears. The active ingredient in those tablets, a derivative of belladonna, also known in folklore as the Hand of Glory, a key component in summoning rituals. The machine begins to act out. It's not just dangerous, it's predatory. It rumbles with a sound like breathing. It seems to watch the workers. Another man, Stanner, is pulled in, his arm ripped from his socket while the machine howls and the electrical fuses refuse to blow. It is eating. It is growing stronger. Hunton and Jackson decide they must act. They cannot legally shut down the machine forever based on a hunch about demons, so they opt for an exorcism. Jackson prepares holy water and a wafer, planning a ritual to drive the spirit out. They believe they are dealing with a minor demon, something that can be cowed by the authority of the church. This is their fatal flaw, underestimating the evolution of evil. They break into the laundry at night. The mangler is waiting. It sits in the dark, hissing, hot and aware. The atmosphere is thick with the smell of ozone and blood, a recurring olfactory motif in King's work, signaling the presence of the supernatural. Jackson begins the rite. He reads from the Bible. Hunton sprinkles the holy water. The reaction is instantaneous and catastrophic. The machine doesn't just shut down, it rebels. The holy water sears the metal like acid. The machine roars to life, not with mechanical, mindless energy, but with a furious, sentient intent. The floor cracks. The concrete shatters. The terror here is the subversion of our expectations. We expect the ritual to work, or at least to contain the beast. Instead, the ritual acts as a catalyst. The demon inside the machine is too strong, or perhaps the white magic of the ritual is incompatible with the industrial modern composition of the vessel. Or more terrifyingly, the ingredients were stronger than they guessed. The mangler tears itself free from the concrete floor. It is no longer a stationary object. It has become a mobile predator. Jackson is killed instantly, sacrificed to the metal beast. Hunton is left staring at a nightmare, a 30-foot-long combination of gears, belts, and superheated rollers that is now crawling across the floor, eyes glowing with electric hate, seeking to consume. Hunton flees. He runs to the home of the inspector, Martin, shattered and raving. He is a broken man, much like Arthur in the previous story, his worldview decimated by the impossible. He babbles about the machine, about Jackson's death. Martin tries to calm him, thinking he's gone mad. But then the sound begins. In the distance, a grinding, clattering roar, the sound of metal on asphalt, the smell of burning and blood drifting on the night breeze. The story ends not with a confrontation, but with an escalation. Martin looks out the window and realizes the truth too late. The mangler hasn't just escaped the laundry. It is rolling down the street. It is hunting. Both stories explore the fragility of the human body and the human mind when faced with forces that defy natural law. In I Am the Doorway, the horror is intimate, festering inside the skin, turning the protagonist into a puppet for cosmic voyeurs. In The Mangler, the horror is external and massive, turning the tools of our industrial convenience into devouring monsters. Whether it comes from the dark void of Venus or the steam-choked floor of a laundromat, the message is the same. We are small, we are soft, and the doors we open, whether by rocket ship or by accident, cannot always be closed. The Boogeyman. The narrative opens not on a monster, but on a confession. Lester Billings lies on a psychiatrist's couch, a man carved from tension and aggressive denial. He is 28, divorced, and the father of 3 children who are all in the ground. He isn't there for redemption. He is there because he has nowhere left to hide. This is the terrifying brilliance of the story. It masquerades as a psychological study of a grieving, perhaps delusional father, before ripping the rug out to reveal something far more primal. Billings tells Dr. Harper that he killed his kids, not with his hands, but through a negligence born of terror. He claims the boogeyman did it. But as we listen to Billings speak, we are forced to confront a different kind of horror, the toxicity of the man himself. He is a portrait of fragile masculinity, a man who despises sissies and enforced a brutal stoicism on his toddlers, only to crumble in the face of the darkness himself. He recounts the death of his firstborn, Denny. The child cried in the night, pointing at the closet, whispering the creature's name. Billings, entrenched in his belief that coddling creates weakness, ignored the terror. When Denny died, he was found with his neck broken, the closet door standing slightly ajar, a crack of darkness in a safe room. Billings focuses on the physical impossibility of the door being open as he had latched it. Here, the story taps into that universal childhood dread, the boundary between the safe bedroom and the unknown abyss of the closet. Then came Shirl. The pattern repeated. The crying, the shadows, the claws scratching in the dark. Billings admits he heard noises, slithering, wet sounds, but his pride and his fear paralyzed him. When Shirl died, she had swallowed her tongue, her face black, her eyes accusing. The medical examiners called it a brain convulsion, a crib death. But Billings saw the open closet. The psychological horror deepens when we learn about the third child, Andy. By this point, Billings is fully aware of the entity hunting his bloodline.
He moves the family to a new town, Waterbury, hoping to outrun the shadow.
For a year they are safe, but the creature is an apex predator. It tracks them. The noises return, the clicking of claws, the smell of wet, rotting seaweed. And here is the most damning confession. The moment Billings transforms from victim to villain. Sensing the entity closing in, Billings moved little Andy into the bedroom he had been sleeping in, using his own son as bait to buy himself safety. When the screaming started, Billings didn't rush in to save his boy. He ran. He fled to a diner, drank coffee until dawn, and returned only when the sun could protect him. He found Andy broken like a discarded doll. Dr. Harper listens to this litany of cowardice with professional detachment. He suggests future appointments, trying to steer Billings toward accepting his guilt. But as Billings leaves the office, the atmosphere shifts from clinical to eldritch. The nurse is gone. The receptionist's desk is empty. Billings returns to the doctor's office, perhaps for reassurance, only to find the room changed. The closet door, the recurring totem of his nightmare, is open. Not a crack, but wide. The voice that emanates from the shadows is not Dr. Harper's. It is thick, rotted, sounding like a voice dragging itself through sludge. The boogeyman steps out, still clutching the severed mask of the doctor's face in its clawed hand. The reality of the monster validates Billings' story, but it doesn't absolve him. The horror isn't just that the monster is real, it's that the monster found a man hollow enough to serve up his own children to save his skin. Grey matter. We shift from the claustrophobia of a doctor's office to the isolation of a Maine blizzard. Grey matter explores a different kind of rot, not the psychological decay of a father, but the physical transmutation of a human being consumed by their vices. The setting is Henry's Night Owl, a convenience store serving as a sanctuary for a group of old-timers while a nor'easter screams outside. This is a classic frame story setup, grounding the horror in the mundane before venturing into the grotesque. The catalyst is Timmy Grenadine, a terrified teenager who bursts into the store. He is there to buy beer for his father, Richie, a man who has been on a downward spiral since a workplace injury. But Timmy isn't just scared of an abusive drunk, he is witnessing a biological nightmare. The lore here is subtle, but horrifying. It begins with a bad batch of beer. Richie drank a can that tasted wrong, smelled faint and foul, yet he consumed it anyway, a testament to the blind hunger of addiction. The narrative implies this wasn't just spoiled alcohol, but a mutagen, perhaps extraterrestrial or simply a mistake of chemistry. Timmy recounts the slow, agonizing devolution of his father. At first, it was just an aversion to light. Richie sat in the dark, wrapping himself in blankets. Then came the smell, a stench of fermenting apples and old cheese. The boy describes seeing his father's skin turn grey and jelly-like. It's a masterful piece of body horror that serves as a metaphor for alcoholism, the addicts slowly losing their humanity, becoming a shapeless, consuming force that destroys the home. The horror escalates when Timmy reveals the diet of this new creature. It's no longer just drinking beer. The thing that was Richie is eating dead cats, swallowing them whole. The boy fled when he saw his father, now a grey, slithering blob, sliding up the wall like a slug. Henry, the store owner, and the narrator decide they must intervene. They are armed with a pistol and a case of beer, walking into the storm toward the Grenadine apartment. The journey is painted with dread. The smell of the apartment building hits them before they even reach the upper floor. It is the scent of a tomb opened in summer. When they reach the apartment, the hallway is slick with grey slime, the carpet dissolved by acidic secretion. Henry calls out to Richie, offering the beer. The voice that answers is no longer human. It is a wet, bubbling sound, demanding the cans be opened because it no longer has fingers to work the tabs. The creature is desperate, driven only by the need to feed the transformation. The climax is the explosion of violence and revelation. The door bursts open and the men see what Richie has become. He is a wave of grey, pulsating jelly, a fungus that has consumed the man entirely. But the true horror is the biological imperative of the creature. It isn't just existing, it is multiplying. The narrator sees a line of fission running down the center of the blob, eyes dividing, a new mouth forming. Henry fires his gun, and the men flee into the snow, leaving the outcome ambiguous. Back at the store, the narrator sits in stunned silence, doing the math. If the creature divides, it becomes 2, then 4, then 8. It is an exponential threat. The story ends not with a jump scare, but with the existential dread of the multiplication table. The blizzard outside is no longer the primary threat. It is merely the cold backdrop to a biological apocalypse that has just begun to bloom in a dark room upstairs. Battleground. The professional hitman is a creature of routine and compartmentalization. For John Renshaw, the killing of Hans Morris, a toy manufacturer, was simply business, a transaction of violence for a payout that would secure his comfort. He moves through the world with the arrogance of an apex predator, a human hawk who believes he sits at the top of the food chain. But Stephen King often likes to remind us that the food chain is fragile, and hubris is the ultimate lure for destruction. Renshaw returns to his penthouse, his sanctuary, expecting nothing more than a gin and tonic and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. But a package awaits him. It's a delivery that bypasses his usual security filters. Addressed in a spiky handwriting he recognizes from a photograph on his victim's desk. It is from Morris's mother. The note inside is chillingly maternal. "Best from your #1 idea girl." This is our first psychological cue that Renshaw isn't dealing with a random act of revenge, but something deeply personal and meticulously planned. Inside the package is a footlocker. It's a G.I. Joe Vietnam set. To Renshaw, it looks like harmless cardboard and plastic, a final impotent gesture from a grieving mother. But as he inspects the contents, miniature soldiers, helicopters, heavy weaponry, the atmosphere shifts from curiosity to impossible dread. The footlocker moves. King masterfully inverts the power dynamic here. Renshaw, the giant, the killer, is suddenly besieged by the microscopic. The tiny soldiers that emerge aren't clumsy automata, they are a coordinated military unit. They deploy with tactical precision. This isn't child's play. It is guerrilla warfare in a living room. Renshaw's reaction is pure instinct. He doesn't waste time questioning his sanity. He focuses on survival. This is the mark of his profession. When the tiny helicopters lift off with an insect-like whine, he attacks. But the toys fight back with agonizing efficiency. He is stung by needle-sized bullets, slashed by rotor blades, and burned by miniature bazooka fire. The surrealism of the situation clashes with the visceral reality of his pain. He is being dismantled piece by caricatures of violence. He retreats, bleeding and bewildered, barricading himself in the bathroom. The psychological toll is immense. He is a man used to controlling the environment, yet he is pinned down by plastic figures that treat him like a heavily fortified objective. The absurdity of the situation is compounded when a note is slid under the door demanding surrender. Renshaw, retaining his defiant grit to the end, scribbles "nuts" and slides it back. It's a reference to absolute military defiance, proving that even in the face of the impossible, Renshaw refuses to break. But his tactical mind leads him to a fatal miscalculation. He escapes to the ledge of the high-rise, planning a counterattack. He believes he can outsmart them with fire, using lighter fluid to incinerate the hive. He crashes back through the window, unleashing his Molotov cocktail, thinking he has won. He sees the soldiers retreat into the box, but he failed to read the inventory list fully. As he stands there, victorious in his mind, the final piece of the arsenal is deployed. The toys possess a scale model thermonuclear weapon. The ending is instantaneous and blinding. Renshaw is vaporized not by a monster, but by the very tools of war he spent his life emulating. The irony is total. The professional killer is obliterated by the playthings of war, proving that in King's universe, violence always scales up, no matter how small the package. Trucks. We shift now from the claustrophobia of a penthouse to the desolate, open entrapment of a highway truck stop. In Trucks, King explores a scenario where the tools of industry gain sentience and revolt. The horror here is industrial. It is the smell of diesel, the grind of gears, and the sheer, crushing weight of steel. The story opens in media res, with a group of strangers trapped in a diner. The protagonist, a narrator who remains a cynical observer, watches as the machines outside turn on their creators. We see Snodgrass, a salesman, break under the pressure. Panic overrides reason, and he sprints for safety. The trucks, massive, rumbling beasts, don't just run him down, they hunt him. A semi-truck punts him into a drainage ditch with the calculated cruelty of a cat playing with a mouse. The psychological terror for the survivors is rooted in the uncanny. These machines are familiar. They are the backbone of the American economy, the things we pass on the highway every day without a second glance. Now, they are the masters. The group inside represents a cross-section of society. A trucker who can't believe his own rig has turned on him, a counterman trying to maintain order, and a young couple, Jerry and his girlfriend, caught in the crossfire. As the siege wears on, the power dynamic becomes clear. The trucks circle like sharks. They are patient. When the diner's power is cut, the humans are plunged into darkness, forced to rely on candlelight and fading hope. The narrator and Jerry attempt a sortie for water, a basic biological need that highlights their newfound fragility. They are nearly crushed by a Peterbilt that slams into the building, a massive brute force attack that shatters the illusion of safety. The escalating horror culminates with the arrival of a bulldozer. This is the tank of the revolution. It doesn't just circle, it attacks the structure directly. The diner, a symbol of human civilization and comfort, is torn apart. Jerry, in a moment of tragic heroism, tries to stop it with Molotov cocktails. He succeeds in destroying the machine, but at the cost of his life. The futility of his sacrifice is palpable. For every machine they destroy, 10 more are waiting on the horizon. Then comes the shift that changes the story from a survival thriller to a dystopian nightmare. The trucks begin to communicate. They honk their air horns in Morse code. Attention, someone must pump fuel. This is the moment of realization. They don't just want to kill, they want to enslave. They are biological entities of steel requiring nourishment, and humans are simply the opposable thumbs needed to deliver it. The debate inside the diner is short-lived. Resistance means death. Compliance means slavery. The narrator, realizing the checkmate, walks out to the pumps. The scene is grotesque. He is surrounded by the purring engines, choked by the fumes of hydrocarbons. He becomes a nursemaid to monsters. As he pumps the fuel, he notices the line of trucks stretching to the horizon. It is endless. King leaves us with a chilling epiphany. The narrator realizes that this isn't just a local anomaly. It is a global coup. He envisions the future, the draining of the swamps, the paving of the wild places, the entire world flattened and asphalted to serve the wheels of the new masters. And in a final crushing blow to hope, he looks up. He sees silver contrails in the sky, planes. He wishes he could believe there are people flying them, but he knows better. The conquest is total. Humanity has been demoted from architects of the world to the maintenance crew, destined to grease the gears of a machine that no longer needs a driver. Sometimes they come back. Trauma is not a linear experience. It is a circle, a loop that plays in the dark theater of the mind, waiting for the projector to jam on the most horrific frame. For Jim Norman, a high school teacher trying to rebuild his life after a nervous breakdown. That frame is frozen 16 years in the past. It is the image of his older brother Wayne, dying in the dirty shadows of a railroad underpass. Stephen King's Sometimes They Come Back is a grim exploration of this cyclical nature of fear, suggesting that the ghosts of our past don't just haunt us, they actively hunt us. Jim's life seems to be trending upward. He secures a job at Harold Davis High School, a modern, affluent institution that stands in stark contrast to the rough vocational school where his previous mental collapse occurred. He and his wife Sally celebrate this normalcy, this fragile veneer of stability. But the subconscious is a treacherous thing. As soon as Jim finds his footing, the nightmares return. He dreams of that day in 1957, Stratford, Connecticut. The sensory details are suffocating. The smell of cut grass, the humidity, and the looming dread of the railroad trestle. In the dream, he is always 9, helpless, and watching the local greasers, Vinnie, Lawson, and Garcia, corner his brother. The outcome is fixed. Knives flash, a train roars, and Wayne dies while Jim runs. This is the primal wound of Jim's psyche, the moment where his courage failed and his brother paid the price. At his new school, Jim is assigned a class euphemistically titled Living with Literature, a holding pen for the school's slow learners and jocks. It is here, in the mundane setting of a Period 7 classroom, that the supernatural begins to bleed into reality. It starts with a death. Billy Stearns, a quiet student, is killed in a hit-and-run. His replacement is a transfer student named Robert Lawson. When Jim opens the file, he sees a face that defies logic, a face he knows from 1957. Lawson is the spitting image of one of the boys who held Wayne down. He even has the same scars. Here, King plays with the concept of the uncanny valley. Jim tries to rationalize the impossible. He tells himself it's a coincidence, a trick of memory exacerbated by his fragile mental state. But the malevolence is palpable. Lawson isn't just a bad student. He's an ancient predator in a denim jacket. He taunts Jim, not with the ignorance of a teenager, but with the knowing malice of an old enemy. The pattern escalates with terrifying precision. Another student, Kathy Slavin, falls to her death from a roof. She is replaced by David Garcia, the second member of the gang. The atmosphere in the school shifts. The hallways of Harold Davis High, once symbols of modern safety, become dark corridors echoing with the threat of the past. Jim realizes he is being targeted. The trauma isn't just replaying in his head anymore, it is physically manifesting to finish the job. Jim attempts to find logic in the madness. He contacts an old police officer from Stratford, Mr. Nell. The revelation he receives is the pivot point of the horror. The real Lawson, Garcia, and Vinnie Corey are dead. They died in a fiery car crash, a hot rod with snake eyes painted on the side, only 6 months after murdering Wayne. They burned alive. This confirms that Jim is not facing human delinquents. He is facing revenants, demonic entities wearing the skins of dead greasers brought back by the gravitational pull of Jim's own fear. The third and final domino falls. Chip Osway, the last legitimate student in the row, vanishes, terrified by the new kids. He is replaced by the leader, Vinnie Corey. The trio is complete. They sit in Jim's class, unaging and arrogant, dropping the facade entirely. Vinnie openly references the murder, mocking Jim's childhood cowardice. They are not here for an education. They are here to close the loop. They tell Jim he is unfinished business. The psychological assault turns physical when Jim's wife Sally becomes the final pawn. She is murdered, struck down presumably by the spectral hot rod. Her death shatters Jim, but paradoxically it also cauterizes his fear. The nervous breakdown does not recur. Instead, a cold, hard resolve takes its place. In the depths of grief, Jim realizes that the rules of the living no longer apply. To fight the dead, he must traffic in death. He turns to a book titled Raising Demons. It is a frantic, desperate bid for survival. King often posits that the cost of magic is blood and pain, and this ritual is no exception. Jim returns to the school at night, transforming his classroom into a ceremonial chamber. He prepares the components: a photo of Wayne, a sweatband from Wayne's old baseball cap, and his own blood. The sacrifice is visceral. Jim hacks off his own fingers, 2 of them, as an offering to the dark forces he is imploring. The physical pain is meaningless to him now. He has already lost everything that mattered. The atmosphere in the room thickens, heavy with ozone and dread. Jim summons a force, thinking he is calling for his brother's spirit to protect him. He puts a sound effects record on the stereo, the sound of a freight train. It is a masterful stroke of psychological warfare, recreating the exact auditory environment of the original trauma. The demon greasers arrive, expecting to corner a frightened teacher. Instead, they walk into a trap. But it is not a trap of steel and iron. It is a trap of metaphysics. The classroom dissolves into the misty memory of the underpass. The train sounds become real, and from the pentagram Jim has drawn, a figure emerges. It looks like Wayne. It wears the Little League uniform. But there is something wrong about it, a coldness that shouldn't exist in a beloved brother. The reenactment begins. The greasers, suddenly stripped of their supernatural arrogance, realize they are the victims in this new script. They attack the Wayne figure, but the narrative has changed. The Wayne thing is not a helpless boy. It is a manifestation of vengeance. As Vinny stabs the spectre, the illusion of their power collapses. The demons are consumed, charred and broken, dragged down into the nothingness from which they came. However, the story does not end with a triumphant reunion. The entity that wears Wayne's face turns to Jim. The eyes are not the eyes of a loving brother. They are yellow, ancient, and malignant. The voice is cold. It whispers, "I'll come back, Jim." The horror of the ending lies in the ambiguity of the exchange. Jim has successfully banished the demons of his past, but he has done so by inviting a new monster into his reality. He traded 3 devils for 1. As he leaves the school, maimed and alone, the reader is left with the chilling realization that the past can never truly be fixed. You cannot raise the dead to solve the problems of the living without paying a terrible price. The classroom is empty, the greasers are gone, but the darkness remains. Sometimes they come back indeed. And sometimes, what comes back is worse than what was lost. Strawberry Spring. There are corners of the human mind that are best left in shadow, places where the fog never quite lifts. Stephen King often takes us to these places, but rarely with the quiet, creeping dread found in the story of a man haunted by a peculiar weather phenomenon. The story begins with a newspaper headline that acts as a trigger, unlocking a vault of repressed memory: Spring Heel Jack. For the narrator, these words bridge an 8-year gap, pulling him back to a time at New Sharon Teachers College during a meteorological anomaly known as Strawberry Spring. This is a false spring, a lying season, where winter retreats deceptively, bringing a humid, misty warmth that old-timers claim inevitably leads to a massive storm. It is a time when the world feels out of joint, and in this narrative, the weather serves as a perfect metaphor for the narrator's own fracturing psyche. In March of 1968, the campus is swallowed by a dense, milky fog. It is within this whiteout that the murders begin. The first victim is Gail Sermon. The brutality of her death, throat cut, stands in stark contrast to the dreamlike, muffled quality of the fog-bound campus. The students, including the narrator, react with a mix of terror and morbid fascination. King masterfully paints the collective anxiety of the student body. They are young, supposedly safe in their academic bubble, yet hunted by a shadow they christen Spring Heel Jack, named after the Victorian slasher. Here, we see the psychological weight of the story. The fog doesn't just hide the killer, it seems to incubate him. It represents a suspension of reality. Police arrest a boyfriend, Carl Amalara, desperate to close the case. The narrator notes the relief everyone feels. If it's a crime of passion, it's understandable, it's human. But when the fog returns, so does the killing. Anne Bray is next. The police are helpless, chasing shadows in a landscape that refuses to give up its secrets. The panic escalates into hysteria, with rumors flying faster than facts, a sociological breakdown that mirrors the breaking of the weather. The narrator drifts through this period with a strange detachment. He describes walking alone at night, enchanted by the mist, having headaches, and losing track of time. This is the crucial clue, the breadcrumb trail of a dissociated mind. While others huddle in groups, terrified, he wanders the enchanted campus. He creates a psychological barrier between himself and the violence, viewing the events through a lens of melancholy beauty rather than horror. Another student, Adele Parkins, is found dead, and then Marcia Curran. The killer mocks the authorities, leaving taunting messages. But as quickly as it began, the strawberry spring breaks. A harsh northern winter storm slams into New England, freezing the world back into logical cold order. The murders stop. The lying spring is over, and with it, the madness seems to recede. The narrator graduates, marries, and settles into a normal life, the perfect camouflage of the mundane. But the story is a cycle. Now, 8 years later, the strawberry spring has returned. The narrator's wife is crying in the next room because he was out all night and can't account for his whereabouts. He remembers only the fog and the lovely shadows. The news reports a fresh murder on the old campus. The realization that crashes down on the narrator and us is one of the most chilling in horror literature. He is Spring-Heel Jack. The fog wasn't hiding the killer from him, it was hiding the killer within him. He admits he is afraid to open the trunk of his car. The lying spring isn't just the weather, it is the narrator's entire existence during his lucid periods. The season calls the monster out, and when the fog rolls in, the man we know disappears, replaced by the thing that lives in the mist, the ledge. If Strawberry Spring is about the internal horror of the mind, the ledge is a masterclass in external physical suspense and the raw will to survive. It strips away the supernatural to focus on a terrifyingly simple wager between two men who represent opposite ends of the social spectrum, the untouchable elite and the desperate hustler. Stan Norris is a tennis pro who has made the fatal error of falling in love with Marcia, the wife of a powerful and sadistic crime boss named Kressner. Norris is brought to Kressner's penthouse, 43 stories above the city. The apartment is a fortress of wealth, disconnected from the world below, a physical manifestation of Kressner's detachment from humanity. Kressner is a man who collects people and experiences like butterflies on pins. He reveals he has framed Norris with heroin planted in his car. Norris faces decades in prison. But Kressner, a compulsive gambler who prides himself on never welshing or backing out of a bet, offers a way out. He proposes a wager. If Norris can circumnavigate the building by walking on the 5-inch limestone ledge that runs around the penthouse, he can have the money, his freedom, and Marcia. The psychological dynamic here is crucial. Kressner doesn't believe Norris can do it. He has watched others fail this test, paralyzed by the sheer vertigo of the drop. He views Norris as a piker, a nobody. He's playing God with a mortal's life for entertainment. Norris, backed into a corner with no other options, accepts. The journey on the ledge is a visceral nightmare. King removes the safety of the interior world and forces us out into the wind and the cold. Norris is not just fighting gravity, he is fighting his own physiological responses. The trembling muscles, the sweat that chills in the wind, the hypnotic pull of the drop. The city below is reduced to abstraction, tiny lights that signify a world he might never touch again. The tension spikes when Norris encounters an obstacle Kressner likely didn't account for, or perhaps hoped for: a pigeon. This mundane city bird becomes a dragon in this high-altitude traverse. Defending its nesting territory, the bird pecks at Norris's ankle, threatening to destabilize his precarious balance. This scene underscores the story's theme: nature is indifferent to human drama. Norris is almost undone, not by the criminal mastermind, but by a simple bird. Through sheer grit and a primal survival instinct, Norris kicks the bird away and continues his agonizing shuffle. He completes the circuit. It is a triumph of human will over engineered cruelty. He collapses back onto the balcony, expecting his reward. But this is where the story twists the knife. Kressner welcomes him back with a smile and the money. He tells Norris he can have Marcia, and then reveals that he has already killed her. She is at the morgue. Technically, Kressner didn't Welsh. He offered Marcia. He just didn't specify she would be alive. It is a sociopathic loophole, a final exertion of power to show Norris that he never really had a chance. The devastating grief and rage that fills Norris triggers a shift in power. The tennis pro, who was just trying to survive, now has nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. Norris overpowers Kressner's bodyguard, seizing a gun. The balance of power flips instantly. Kressner, stripped of his hired muscle and his manipulative games, is revealed as a coward. He tries to bribe Norris, offering millions, but Norris isn't interested in money anymore. He wants justice. In a poetic reversal, Norris forces Kressner out onto the balcony at gunpoint. He offers the crime lord the same wager: walk the ledge, and he lives. The story ends with Norris sitting in the penthouse waiting. He knows Kressner, trembling and soft from a life of luxury, likely won't make it past the first corner. And even if he does, Norris implies he hasn't decided if he will be a Welsher or not. The ending leaves us with the grim satisfaction of vengeance, observing how quickly the masters of the world crumble when they are forced to play their own rigged games. The Lawnmower Man. In the quiet, sun-drenched stagnation of suburbia, the lawn is often the ultimate status symbol, a green moat separating the homeowner from the chaos of the natural world. For Harold Parkett, however, his backyard had transformed from a point of pride into a source of crushing anxiety. Following a traumatic incident the previous autumn, involving a neighbor's cat and a lawnmower blade, a gruesome event that scarred his family's psyche, Harold had let nature reclaim his property. By midsummer, the grass wasn't just long, it was a meadow, a mocking reminder of his own lethargy and the disruption of his domestic order. This sets the stage for Stephen King's exploration of the clash between sanitized modern living and the raw, violent uncontrollability of nature. Driven by his wife's complaints and his own shame, Harold finally seeks help, finding a cryptic advertisement for pastoral greenery. The name itself is an irony, invoking peaceful, shepherd-like imagery that starkly contrasts with the horror about to arrive. When the Lawnmower Man appears, he is the antithesis of the clean-cut neighborhood boy Harold used to hire. This man is obese, dressed in stained overalls, and carries an aroma that is an overpowering mix of cut grass, rich earth, and swamp gas. He is physically grotesque, yet he possesses a jovial, almost manic energy. He refers to his employer as Pan, a detail Harold initially misses. This is our first clue that we have stepped out of a suburban drama and into a pagan ritual. Pan is the Greek god of the wild shepherds and rustic music, often associated with sexuality and unbridled nature. The horror escalates not through darkness, but in broad daylight. Harold falls into a doze, only to be awakened by a mechanical roar that sounds less like an engine and more like a living beast. When he investigates, he witnesses a scene that defies sanity. The lawnmower, a battered red machine, is running independently. It tears through the yard with predatory aggression. But the true obscenity is the man himself. Stripped naked, the lawnmower man crawls on all fours behind the machine, devouring the freshly cut clippings. This act of consumption is visceral and revolting, staining his face green. King uses this imagery to dissolve the boundary between man and beast. The lawnmower man isn't just maintaining the yard, he is communing with it in a primal, biological way. The machine acts as a familiar, slaughtering a mole that attempts to flee. The man eats the mole without hesitation. This is the raw cruelty of the food chain invading the safety of a fenced-in yard. Harold, paralyzed by the sheer lunacy of the spectacle, faints. When he wakes, the job is done. The yard is pristine. The lawnmower man, still naked and showing distinct physical abnormalities, green body hair and feet that appear cleft like hooves, calmly explains the method. He speaks of sacrifice and efficiency, framing the grotesque display as a business model sanctioned by the boss. Harold, desperate to normalize the situation, pays the man and retreats, but the psychological breach has been made. The climax arrives when Harold, terrified and unable to deny the supernatural threat, attempts to call the police. He tries to report indecent exposure, grasping at the laws of civilization to combat an entity that predates them. But the ancient world does not respect the sanctuary of the suburban home. The lawnmower man returns, crashing through the front door with his mechanical beast. He chastises Harold for breaking the unspoken covenant of the service. In the end, Harold Parquet becomes the final clipping. The lawnmower chases him through his own living room and out onto the porch. Harold trips, a fatal stumble born of his own sedentary lifestyle, and is consumed by the machine. The police arrive later to find only remains in the bird bath. They rationalize it as the work of a maniac, a schizophrenic. They cannot comprehend that Harold was a sacrifice to Pan, a blood offering to ensure the grass grows green. The story serves as a grim reminder. Beneath the manicured veneer of modern life, the wild, chaotic forces of the ancient world are waiting to reclaim their territory. Quitters, Inc. If the lawnmower man explores the horror of untamed nature, Quitters, Inc. examines the horror of absolute control. Here the monster is not a satyr but a corporation, and the setting shifts from the suburbs to the high-pressure concrete jungle of New York City. We follow Dick Morrison, a middle-aged advertising executive crumbling under the weight of his own vices. He is overworking, overeating, and most dangerously smoking heavily. Morrison runs into an old acquaintance, Jimmy McCann, at an airport bar. McCann, once a heavy smoker, is now the picture of health and success. He attributes his transformation to a mysterious firm called Quitters, Inc., and hands Morrison a card. This chance meeting acts as the siren song for Morrison, appealing to his desire for self-improvement and his envy of McCann's vitality. A month later, desperate and downtrodden, Morrison visits the firm. The environment is disarmingly corporate, plush carpets, efficient secretaries, but the underlying tension is immediate. He meets Vic Donati, a counselor who embodies the philosophy of the organization, pure pragmatism. Donati is not a doctor, he is an enforcer of will. He explains that Quitters, Inc. was founded by a mob boss who applied the brutal efficiency of organized crime to the problem of addiction. The psychological core of this story is the concept of externalized consequence. Donati reveals their method. They do not punish the smoker directly. Instead, they punish the things the smoker loves. To demonstrate, Donati shows Morrison a rabbit in a cage, conditioned to fear eating through electric shocks. This is aversion therapy, but with a sadistic twist. Donati explains that if Morrison smokes, it is his wife, Cindy, who will be brought to the rabbit room and shocked. This creates a terrifying psychological prison. Morrison is placed under 24-hour surveillance. The horror lies in the paranoia. Every shadow could be an operative. The genius of Donati's system is that it weaponizes guilt. A man might risk his own health for a nicotine fix, but risking his wife's pain is a burden few can bear. It forces Morrison to confront the selfishness of his addiction. King masterfully depicts the withdrawal process not just as physical cravings, but as a mental siege. Morrison hallucinates, snaps at people, and feels the weight of the invisible eyes watching him. The inevitable slip-up occurs during a traffic jam, a moment of high stress where habit overrides logic. He smokes only a few drags before realizing his mistake, but the omniscient Quitters, Inc. knows instantly. The punishment scene is brutal in its clinical detachment. Morrison is forced to watch through one-way glass as his wife is electrocuted. He cannot intervene. He is held at gunpoint. The physical pain is hers, but the torture is his. The brilliance of the narrative is in the aftermath. When Morrison confesses everything to Cindy, she does not leave him. She sees the brutality of the company as a necessary evil to save his life. She accepts the pain as the price of his salvation, thanking the tormentors. This twists the narrative from a thriller into a dark commentary on the sacrifices we accept for the greater good. The story concludes with a chilling fast-forward. Morrison is cured, physically fit and successful, but he lives under the eternal sword of Damocles. The company monitors his weight, promising to amputate his wife's little finger if he becomes obese. The final scene takes us to a theater where Morrison and Cindy encounter the McCanns. They shake hands, and Morrison realizes that Jimmy McCann's wife is missing her pinky finger. It is a silent, horrifying confirmation that the system works, but the cost is paid in flesh. Quitters, Inc. suggests that the only way to conquer our inner demons is to fear a greater demon outside of us. It strips away the illusion of free will, proposing that true discipline is only achieved through terror. Morrison is healthy, but he is no longer free. He is a permanent subject of the pragmatic, ruthless regime he signed away his life to. I know what you need. The terror in Stephen King's work often hides in the mundane, in the things that seem too good to be true. In this story, the horror begins not with a monster, but with a simple strawberry double-dip ice cream cone. Elizabeth Rogan is drowning in sociology texts at the student union, facing the crushing weight of finals. She is interrupted by a nondescript young man, short, twitchy, unkempt, wearing mismatched socks. This is Ed Hamner Jr. He triggers a sense of déjà vu in her, a feeling that usually signals a glitch in the matrix, or in this case, a psychic intrusion. He offers her that ice cream cone, pinpointing exactly what she was secretly craving. It's a cute moment on the surface, but underneath, it is the first violation of her mind. Ed isn't just a weirdo, he is a predator of information. He claims he's been watching her, which he passes off as a crush, but it's actually surveillance. He offers her a way out of her academic stress, the answers to the final exam. He claims to have an eidetic memory, a photographic recall of the professor's previous tests. Elizabeth, desperate to keep her scholarship, accepts the help. She aces the exam. But this isn't just cheating, it's a Faustian bargain. By accepting his gift, she has unknowingly invited a parasite into her life. King expertly juxtaposes the mundane stresses of college life with a creeping supernatural dread. Elizabeth heads to Maine for the summer to work with her boyfriend, Tony. It should be a time of relaxation, but the atmosphere curdles. Tony pressures her about marriage, and Elizabeth feels trapped. Her subconscious screams at her in a nightmare where she is buried alive, only to be saved by Ed Hamner. This dream isn't random, it's a psychic planting. Ed is positioning himself as the savior before the tragedy even strikes. And strike it does. Tony is killed in a freak accident. A red Fiat loses its brakes and crushes him. It is a clean mechanical failure, an honest accident. But in the King universe, accidents are rarely accidental. Elizabeth is consumed by guilt and grief, vulnerable and broken, and who appears? as if summoned by the scent of blood. Ed Hamner. He finds her in Maine, claiming coincidence. He is gentle, unobtrusive, and perfectly attuned to her grief. He drives a Corvette, a flash of wealth that contradicts his mismatched socks and shabby appearance, and treats her with a terrifying precision. He orders her food without asking, and it is exactly what she wants. He plays the music she needs to hear. This is the nice guy archetype weaponized. Ed Hamner isn't connecting with her, he is mirroring her. He is a psychic chameleon, reflecting her desires back at her until she confuses his manipulation for compatibility. By autumn, they are a couple. Elizabeth feels she has found perfection. Ed never pushes, never demands, and always knows what she needs before she does. But this perfection is sterile. It's the peace of a cage. Her roommate, Alice, serves as the story's anchor to reality. Alice notices the discrepancies, the fact that Ed lied about being in Maine, the impossibility of his eidetic memory when he can't even match his own clothes. Alice hires a private investigator, and the dossier she uncovers peels back the skin of Ed's life to reveal the rot underneath. Ed Hamner is not a savant. He is a psychic vampire. His history is a trail of wreckage. As a child, he made his father rich by predicting roulette wheels and stock markets. But this gift came with a cost. His mother, sensing the unnatural void within her son, tried to kill him with scissors before eventually driving herself and her husband off a cliff. She recognized what Elizabeth hasn't yet seen. Ed manipulates probability and reality to suit his tantrums. He forces the world to bend to his will. Alice confronts Elizabeth with the truth. Ed didn't just guess the sociology questions. He stole the knowledge. He didn't just happen to be in Maine. He was waiting. He didn't just comfort her after Tony's death. He orchestrated the void that he then filled. Alice suggests that Ed's love is actually a form of rape, a violation of Elizabeth's autonomy by forcing her to love him through supernatural grooming. Elizabeth, shaken but defensive, goes to Ed's apartment to prove Alice wrong. What she finds is a physical manifestation of Ed's twisted psyche. The apartment is neat, almost staged, except for one locked closet. Breaking in, she finds the chaos of a chaotic mind, a mess of junk, occult books like the Necronomicon, and a childhood tin box. Inside the box lies the mechanism of her enslavement. There are voodoo dolls. One represents her, complete with hair clipped from her head, hair that dates back to when she was a child in Bridgeport, proving Ed has been stalking her since the first grade. He is the boy she ignored, the background character who stewed in resentment until he acquired the power to force her to look at him. The most damning piece of evidence is a plastic model of a red Fiat. It has been smashed with a hammer. This isn't just sympathy magic. It is a confession of murder. Ed didn't cut the brake lines with a tool. He crushed the toy, and reality followed suit. Ed returns and catches her. The mask of the gentle, supportive boyfriend falls away, revealing a petulant, dangerous child. He screams that he did it all for her. This is the ultimate expression of toxic entitlement, the belief that destroying a woman's life is justified if it makes her dependent on him. He claims he gave her everything she wanted, failing to understand that a love without choice is hollow. Elizabeth, however, realizes the source of his power is also his weakness. He is pathetic. By crushing the doll that represents herself, she breaks his hold. She rejects his narrative. She tells him it's over. Ed, stripped of his power over her, lashes out with a final curse. He warns her that one day when her beauty fades and men stop handing her the world, she will regret leaving him. He tries to plant a seed of future insecurity, betting on the shallow nature of the world to drive her back to him. But Elizabeth walks out. She walks into the cold, biting snow. It is uncomfortable, freezing and harsh, and it is real. She throws the remnants of his magic, the crushed car and the dolls, into the river. She chooses the uncertainty of a lonely, cold night over the warm, suffocating certainty of a life scripted by a monster who thought knowing what she needed was the same as knowing who she was. She survives not by fighting magic with magic, but by reclaiming her own free will, leaving the boy with the mismatched socks alone in his perfect empty room. Children of the Corn. Nebraska is a place of horizons. It is a landscape defined by the relentless geometry of the flat earth meeting the vast, crushing weight of the sky. But for Bert and Vicky Robeson, driving their Thunderbird across the baking asphalt in the summer of 1976, the horizon was obscured by green. Mile after mile, hour after hour, there was only the corn. It creates a suffocating claustrophobia in the open air, a paradox where you can see for miles but see nothing at all. The tension inside the car was thicker than the humid air outside. Bert and Vicky were a couple in the final agonizing throes of a failing marriage. Their bickering wasn't just about lost directions. It was the bleeding out of a relationship that had turned toxic. They were trying to save their marriage in the same way soldiers try to save a village by destroying it, a desperate, scorched earth policy of forced reconciliation. As they argued over the road atlas, the domestic tragedy was interrupted by a sudden, violent thud. Bert slammed on the brakes, leaving black skid marks on the lonely road. They hadn't hit a dog. They had hit a boy. But as the couple stood over the twisted body in the sweltering heat, the horror shifted from vehicular manslaughter to something far more sinister. The boy's throat had been cut. The wound was ragged and dry. He had been fleeing the corn, bleeding out before the car ever touched him. He was a refugee from the rows, murdered seconds before impact. This is the first crack in reality. The boy wasn't just a victim of an accident. He was a victim of a ritual. Bert, trying to maintain a facade of rational control, a trait that likely doomed his marriage, decided to investigate. They found the boy's suitcase. Inside, there were no clothes for a vacation, only rags and a terrifying artifact, a crucifix made of woven corn husks. It was a masterpiece of primitive craftsmanship, stripped kernels forming a suffering Christ, dry and yellow. It was a totem of a religion that had devolved, or perhaps evolved, into something agrarian and bloodthirsty. As they drove on toward the nearest town, Gatlin, the atmosphere grew heavy. The radio, previously a source of static, suddenly blared a sermon. But this wasn't a standard Sunday broadcast. The voice was young, frantic, and obsessed with the blood of the Lamb and atonement. The preacher spoke of the corruptors of the corn. It is here we see the psychological conditioning of the region, a belief system where the divine is not in the sky but in the soil, demanding strict purity. Gatlin itself was a ghost town, but not in the traditional sense. It was a town held in a state of suspended animation. As Bert and Vicky rolled down Main Street, the silence was absolute. No cars, no people, no hum of electricity. They stopped at a diner, and the dust inside told a story of sudden abandonment. The calendar on the wall was turned to August 1964. The prices on the menu were relics of a decade past. It wasn't that the town had died, it was that time had stopped 12 years ago. The psychological horror here stems from the mundane. We are used to seeing ruins, but a town that is fully stocked yet utterly empty implies a sudden collective event, a rupture. Vicky, sensing the predatory nature of the silence, begged to leave. She felt the eyes watching them, the sight unseen. But Bert, driven by a stubborn need to assert control in a chaotic situation, insisted on going to the municipal center to report the body in their trunk. His stubbornness led him to the only building that looked maintained, the church. It is often in the house of the holy that horror finds its most blasphemous expression. Bert left Vicky in the car, a fatal error born of his dismissal of her fears, and entered the sanctuary. Inside, the perversion of faith was absolute. The Catholic and Baptist imagery had been stripped away. In its place was a mural behind the pulpit that would haunt the sanity of any who viewed it. It was a painting of Christ, but a Christ with green hair made of corn, grinning vulpinely, leading his flock not to salvation, but to slaughter. The organ pipes were stuffed with husks. The Bible on the lectern had been surgically altered, with pages of the New Testament cut out, leaving only the harsh justice of the Old Testament. Bert found a ledger, a record of the town's history. It was a book of birth and death, written in a child's hand. As he turned the pages, a chilling pattern emerged. Everyone in the town, Amos, Isaac, Malachi, had their names changed to biblical ones in 1964. But the dates revealed the true horror. In September of 1964, every adult in Gatlin had been executed. The children had risen up, seized by a mania, and slaughtered their parents. But the ledger revealed a second, ongoing law, the age of favor. No entry in the book went past the age of 19. The logic was cold and inescapable. Upon reaching adulthood, the children of Gatlin walked into the corn to be sacrificed. It was a Logan's Run of the prairie, a death cult ensuring that no one would ever grow up to become the corrupt adults they despised. They were preserving their innocence through blood. The realization hit Bert with the force of a physical blow. They were not alone in an empty town. They were intruders in a hive of fanatical children. And he had left his wife alone. Outside, the silence broke. The car horn began to blare, a desperate, continuous scream for help. Bert rushed out to see the nightmare manifest. Dozens of children, dressed in Amish-style clothing, had emerged from the shadows. They carried not guns, but the tools of the farm, knives, hatchets, and sickles. They swarmed the Thunderbird like locusts. Bert watched, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of it, as they dragged Vicky from the car. The violence was sudden and tribal. Bert tried to intervene, but he was attacked by a red-haired teenager. In a moment of primal survival, Bert turned the boy's own knife against him, killing him. The other children paused, shocked not by the death, but by the defiance. In their isolated world, the adult was a mythical demon, yet this one fought back. Panic took the wheel. Bert ran, but in his terror, he made the choice that sealed his fate. He ran away from the road and into the corn. The cornfield is the true antagonist of this story. It is a living, breathing entity. As Bert plunged into the green sea, he felt a strange sense of relief, a false security. He thought the corn would hide him. He didn't realize he was running into the stomach of the beast. As evening approached, the psychology of the environment shifted. Bert, exhausted and wounded, began to notice the impossibility of the field. There were no weeds, no blight, no insects. The corn was perfect, unnatural, manicured by something that was not human. The silence returned, but it was a heavy, expectant silence. The rows seemed to shift, guiding him not toward the highway, but deeper into the heart of the field. Bert stumbled into a clearing as the sun began to set, casting a blood-red light over the Nebraska plains. In the center of the clearing stood the final testament to the town's madness. Two skeletons hung on crude crosses, the Blue Man, the police chief of 1964, and the original minister. They were the trophies of the revolution. But fresh horror awaited. Vicky was there. She had been mounted on a cross, her eyes ripped out and replaced with corn silk, her mouth stuffed with husks. She had been prepared as an offering. The image is one of the most grotesque in horror literature, the complete dehumanization of a person turned into a scarecrow for a pagan god. And then the ground shook. The entity the children worshipped was not a metaphor. It was not a collective delusion. It was real. He who walks behind the rows approached the clearing. King describes it not as a man, but as a towering presence, something vast and green with burning red eyes, smelling of dry decay and ancient earth. It was the embodiment of the land's hunger. Bert's screams were short-lived as the god of the corn claimed its sacrifice. The story does not end with Bert's death, but with the continuation of the cycle. We return to the children, gathered in the corn. Isaac, the boy preacher, announces that the Lord is displeased. Because Bert, an outsider, had defiled the corn by dying in it without permission, the age of favor was to be lowered. The age of sacrifice was dropped from 19 to 18. The tragedy is emphasized in the final moments with Ruth, a pregnant girl who hates the corn, but is too terrified to leave. She watches her lover, Malachi, walk willingly into the rows to die, simply because he has turned 18. The corn rustles in the dark, well pleased. The horror of Gatlin is that it is a closed loop. There is no escape, only the harvest. The children are both the monsters and the victims, trapped in a theocracy of their own making, worshipping a demon that lives in the soil, ensuring that the corn is fed with blood year after endless year. The last rung on the ladder. Regret often arrives in the form of a letter, sometimes delivered too late to matter. For Larry, a successful corporate lawyer who traded his roots for expensive suits and high-rise views, the tragedy began with an envelope covered in forwarding addresses. It was from his sister Katrina, or Kitty, as she was known, in the days when they ran barefoot through the dust of Nebraska. The letter was a suicide note, written 2 weeks before she jumped from a building in Los Angeles. But to understand the fall that killed her, we have to understand the fall that didn't. Larry takes us back to the family farm in Hemmingford Home, a place defined by the harsh, flat horizon and the smell of corn. It is a memory of a specific Saturday in November, the kind of day where the sky turns the color of iron and the wind whispers of coming snow. In the family barn, there was a forbidden game involving a ladder that stretched 70 feet up to the third loft. The goal was to climb high, walk a narrow beam, and swan dive into the massive, sweet-smelling haymow far below. It was a sensation of terrifying freedom, a momentary rebirth where gravity lost its grip. There is a profound psychological anchor here. The blind faith children place in their environment and in each other. Larry and Kitty played this game until the sun began to fade. Larry jumped, burying himself in the hay, but as he watched Kitty climb for her turn, the atmosphere shifted from joy to horror. The ancient ladder, held by rusting nails and rot, began to groan. When the ladder finally snapped, it didn't just break wood, it severed their safety. Kitty was left clinging to the final rung, 60 feet in the air, legs dangling over empty space. The haymow was too far away. A fall now meant death on the hard barn floor. Larry, paralyzed by the sight of his little sister hanging like a precarious ornament, had to act. This moment defines the central tragedy of their lives, the frantic effort to build a cushion for someone you love. Larry ran back and forth, grabbing armfuls of hay to build a pile directly beneath her. It was a pathetic small mound compared to the deep mow they usually dove into, but it was all he had. The tension here is suffocating. The physical exhaustion of the boy, the creaking of the lone rung above, and the impending inevitability of gravity. When the rung finally gave way, Larry screamed for her to let go. And she did. She dropped like a stone, trusting him implicitly. She hit the hay. The sound was too loud, a sickening thud that suggested the end, but miraculously, she survived, with only a broken ankle. When she woke up, her words to Larry were haunting in their simplicity. She told him she hadn't looked down. She didn't know he was building a haystack. She let go simply because he was her big brother, and he told her to. She assumed he would save her. That childhood trust stands in stark, brutal contrast to their adult lives. As the years passed, the ladder of their connection rotted away. Larry climbed the corporate ladder, while Kitty slipped down into a life of failed marriages and prostitution. She reached out to him over the years, asking for help, for a connection. But Larry was always too busy, always climbing. He became the net that wasn't there. The horror of this story isn't the physical danger of the barn. It is the realization that the bond forged in that hay was allowed to wither. Kitty jumped from that building in LA because she finally realized the hay was gone. She was the one who always believed it would be there, and Larry has to live with the silence of a phone that will never ring again. The man who loved flowers. There is a terrifying camouflage in happiness. We are conditioned to see a young man in a grey suit, walking with a bounce in his step on a beautiful May evening in New York City, and assume he is the protagonist of a romance. In the spring of 1963, such a man walks up 3rd Avenue. The air is sweet, the radio plays the 4 seasons, and the world seems to conspire to make him the main character of a love story. King masterfully uses the perspective of the passers-by to deepen the deception. An old woman with groceries, a flower vendor, a traffic cop, they all look at his fair face and starry eyes and see love. They project their own nostalgia onto him. The flower vendor, a cynical man by nature, even gives him a deal on 6 tea roses because the young man's infatuation is so palpable. The young man buys them for Norma. He is bringing her flowers to surprise her. It is the archetype of innocent courtship. However, as the narrative follows him off the bustling avenue and into the darker, quieter side streets, the psychological tone shifts. The transition from the shared public joy of the street to the isolation of the alleyway mirrors the descent from sanity into madness. The shadows lengthen. The sounds of the city fade, replaced by the solitary footsteps of a man on a mission. He checks his pocket, touching something heavy. He sees a woman in the courtyard shadows. He calls out, "Norma!" The joy in his voice is ecstatic, but as he approaches, the reality fractures. The woman turns, and the smile dies on her face. She is not Norma. She tells him he is mistaken, but for the young man, the internal script cannot be rewritten by external facts. He pulls a hammer from his pocket. The violence that follows is shocking not just because of the gore, but because of the disconnect between the man's emotion and his actions. He swings the hammer to silence her screams, to correct the error of her not being Norma. We learn that Norma has been dead for 10 years. This man has been cycling through this delusion, driven by a grief that has metastasized into a monstrous compulsion. He isn't killing out of malice in his own mind. He is killing because the world keeps failing to provide him with Norma. After the deed is done, after the tea roses are spilled among the garbage and the blood, the man retreats into the night. The horror reasserts itself as he steps back onto the lit street. He doesn't look like a monster. He looks, once again, like a man in love. He believes his name is love, and he is still looking for Norma. The scariest monsters are the ones who genuinely believe they are the heroes of a romance, walking among us, their madness perfectly hidden behind a beautiful smile and a bouquet of flowers. One for the road. The terror of the unknown is often amplified by the weather. In the deep winter of Maine, a blizzard acts as a curtain, separating the civilized world from the ancient predatory dark. This story takes us to Tukey's Bar, a warm island of light in a sea of white death. It is narrated by Booth, an old regular, and centers on the intrusion of the outside world into their sanctuary. The intruder is Gerard Lumley, a wealthy man from New Jersey. He stumbles in, half frozen, begging for help. His car is stuck in a snowbank 6 miles away, and he has left his wife Janie and his little daughter Francie inside it to keep warm. But when he mentions where he made the wrong turn, the atmosphere in the bar shifts from concern to dread. He turned into the lot, Jerusalem's lot. For the locals, the lot is not just a ghost town. It is a scar on the land. It burned down 2 years ago, but the evil that infested it, the vampires, did not die with the buildings. There is a heavy, unspoken law here. The residents of the neighboring towns know to keep their heads down and their crucifixes close. Lumley, with his rational city logic, cannot comprehend why these two old men are terrified of a simple rescue mission. He sees snow, they see a hunting ground. Booth and Tukey, driven by a moral obligation that outweighs their fear, take a four-wheel drive vehicle into the blinding storm. The tension mounts with every mile as they drive toward a town that shouldn't exist. The blizzard isolates them, stripping away the authority of the modern world. When they find the Mercedes, it is empty. The tragedy is immediate. The heat is gone, and so is the family. They track footprints into the snow, realizing with sinking hearts that the tracks don't struggle. They are being led. The wind howls, sounding like lost souls, until a voice cuts through it. It is Janie, Lumley's wife. She appears from the shadows, but the description of her is fundamentally wrong. She is too beautiful, too graceful for a woman who should be freezing to death. When she smiles, the horror is revealed. Elongated teeth and eyes that glow with a red, feral hunger. She is no longer a wife. She is a lure. The psychological horror peaks when Lumley, blinded by denial and love, rushes to her. He cannot accept the supernatural reality over the emotional one. He embraces the thing that was his wife, and she feeds on him. It is a perversion of intimacy. Booth and Tukey are helpless to save him. Then, the child appears, Francie. The innocence of a 7-year-old girl is weaponized. She stands atop the snow, leaving no footprints, and asks Booth for a goodnight kiss. The juxtaposition of a child's sweetness with the reality of the vampire is jarring. She is drooling, hungry, a predator wearing the face of a victim. Booth, mesmerized, almost succumbs to the urge to comfort her, which would mean his death. It is Tukey who breaks the spell, throwing a Bible at the creature. The holy object acts like acid, driving her back into the swirling snow. Booth and Tukey flee, leaving the Lumley family to the darkness of the lot. The story ends not with a victory, but with a warning. The evil in Salem's lot is persistent. It waits in the dark, using the faces of loved ones to draw you in. The blizzard eventually clears, but the psychological chill remains. Somewhere in the dark, a little girl is still waiting for her kiss, frozen in time, forever hungry. The ultimate lesson is that there are roads you simply do not take, and darkness that no amount of high beams can penetrate. The woman in the room, the weight of the decision, rests in a small box labeled Darwin Complex. Johnny holds it, feeling the smooth cardboard, contemplating the grey gelatin capsules inside. These aren't the simple aspirin his mother usually chews with a grimace. These are potent, heavy artillery for pain, leftover remnants from her medicine cabinet, a shrine to her deteriorating health. That cabinet tells the history of her decline, a chronological roadmap of illness marked by bottles and suppositories, each representing a step downward in dignity. He stands in the hospital elevator, the certificate on the wall assuring him of safety, though nothing feels safe here. His mother is in the central Maine hospital, recovering, if one can call it that, from a cortotomy. The very word sounds mechanical, violent. The doctor explained it with terrifying simplicity, sticking a needle into the brain to burn out the pain center, like spearing a seed in an orange. It's a chilling metaphor for modern medicine's approach to the terminally ill, treating the body like a broken machine, to be disconnected rather than a human soul to be comforted. It reminds Johnny of science fiction horrors, the idea of rewiring humanity until the spark is gone. Walking down the third-floor corridor, the smell of sawdust and sickness assaults him. The hallway is a parade of the living dead, patients drifting in pinstripe robes, their movements slow and liquid, as if their internal organs were sloshing in jars. This environment strips away identity, reducing unique lives to shuffling figures in Johnnies. Johnny used to need alcohol to face this, drinking a six-pack just to numb the reality of her decay, using the buzz as a shield against the smell of disinfectant and death. In room 312, she waits. She is shrinking, dying quickly now, straining against a body that no longer obeys her. The operation destroyed 60% of her motor control along with the pain. She complains of itching, a phantom sensation in a paralyzed nervous system. When he checks her legs at her request, they are dead weight under the sheet. This is the crux of the horror. The mind remains trapped in a failing vessel, aware of the itch but unable to scratch, aware of the indignity but unable to look away. He remembers her differently. He recalls a moment from his childhood. A fierce, vibrant woman who once struck him with a wet diaper she was washing for her own senile mother. It is a grim, cyclical irony. The woman who once wielded the symbols of infirmity as a weapon is now the helpless invalid, reduced to the same state as the grandmother before her. The power dynamic has completely inverted. The son, who was once silenced by her strength, now holds the power of life and death in his hands. The doctor, a large man who speaks of time as a restructuring of units rather than a lived experience, offers no hope. He predicts a uremic coma, a bloating death where the body turns on itself. This clinical detachment pushes Johnny toward the precipice. The question isn't just about ending pain. It's about mercy versus murder, and whether he can bear the weight of matricide to save her from the shark loose in her body. He decides. He orchestrates the scene with a trembling resolve. He asks her to test her hand, a psychological ploy to convince himself she still has agency, that perhaps she could do this herself. But her hand is a crippled helicopter, barely functional. When he offers the pills, claiming they are for pain, she accepts them with a childlike trust. He feeds them to her, one by one. She gums the gelatin, her tongue yellowed and failing. It is an intimate, grotesque communion, a reversal of the nursing she once gave him. After she drifts into a chemically induced sleep, the final act of self-preservation kicks in. He wipes the bottle and presses her limp fingertips against the plastic, staging a suicide to cover his tracks. It is a moment of cold calculation born of fear, stripping away the nobility of the act. He leaves the room without looking back, returning to the empty normalcy of his home to drink water and wait for the inevitable phone call, left only with the silence and the question of whether he was a good son or simply a man who couldn't watch the end. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this dive into the dark worlds of Stephen King, please subscribe to Horror Tales for more lore.